So here's an updated model that I did modifying the layout after visiting the Auburn facility last week. And so let me run this a little bit with the labels on so that we can talk about, I can show what the components are, and then we'll turn the labels off and get a better view of the animation. So we have patients arriving, going through check-in. They then go to what I call inoculation distribute or in-distribute, where they wait till there's an available space at one of the inoculation stations. And then we have two different areas for observation. There's the high-risk observation area here, and there's the non-high risk or regular observation area here. So let me switch to 3D mode and let it run for just a second. Let me see which view is going to be the easiest. I guess this one's probably the easiest to take a look at. And so you can see again, patients arrive through the arrivals area, and they arrive on a periodic basis. So we have patients arriving on 15-minute intervals, and the current flow is 31 patients arriving every 15 minutes. And in the model, we have a deviation of plus or minus 5 minutes on that arrival time. And so that's why you don't see everyone arriving at the same time, but they speed up when you get close to one of those 15-minute blocks. And so again, they go to the check-in, and the check-in that I saw when I was there were 6 different stations. So there were 2 people at each table. And then once they check in, they then go to the line to wait for available capacity at one of the inoculation stations. So they didn't have the high risk consultation area that was originally planned. Instead, what happens is the consultation for high risk patient happens at the inoculation stations. And so you'll see that happening. I'm going to talk about the times here in just a second. So you get an idea of the layout here, especially of these observation areas. So this is the spacing 6 feet apart and shows the overall capacity. And then as before, our plots, let me switch to plot mode, shows the patients that are instantaneously in the observation area. So you can see how many are there at any given time. And we also show the current number. Let me zoom in a little bit on that. It's kind of hard to see. The current number that are in the system overall. And so here's where we saw that sawtooth pattern that corresponds to that periodic arrival rate. So let me go back in now and change some of the visibility. So I'm going to turn the node labels off, turn the cues off, nodes. Let's go ahead and turn the labels off. And so now you get a better view of the animation. And we'll start our animation sequence and then let that run for just a second so that you can get a perspective of what this looks like. So once again, this is drawn to scale. And so the measurements were taken pretty directly. Some of these I had to eyeball, especially for the inoculation stations in the particular location of the check-in area. Back here, I didn't mention it before, is the pharmacy area and the break room for the staff. And you can see now we have a couple of high-risk patients in the system here. They're the ones that are colored red here. And as I mentioned before, that consultation for high risk, if you watch the animation in detail, you'll see that the high-risk patients spend longer at the inoculation station. So that's kind of a quick overview of the current version of the model. I want to look at a couple of aspects of the data and talk about some of the things that we really don't know, that I'm using estimates. There's something called HR-prob, which is the probability that a patient will be high risk, or we can think about it as the proportion of patients in the arriving population that are high risk. So I just have that set as 7.5, and that's obviously what that actual proportion is. It's going to impact the time because they spend more time at the inoculation station for the Q&A and also at the observation area. The no-show probability, so this is just the probability that someone has an appointment and doesn't show up. Again, adjustable, I just put it at 5% because that seemed reasonable. The replenishment quantity is the quantity that's replenished from the pharmacy. So periodically a runner from the pharmacy takes a batch of syringes filled with the vaccine ready to be injected to the inoculation stations. So I just fixed that at 12 and then said that happens with a mean time or an average time of 5 minutes. So it takes about 5 minutes to create this batch, and so think about that as every 5 minutes we have a runner taking that out to the inoculation stations. And I have some randomness about that. You can see I have it uniformly distributed between 3.5 minutes and 6.5 minutes. And so this time, this 5-minute mean time was based on some preliminary discussions and some observation, but this is, again, an estimate that would be helpful if we had a better estimate based on some existing data. Similarly with the time to check-in, so we said the check-in time is uniformly distributed between 1.5 minutes and 2 minutes, so that's an average time of 1.75 minutes to check in, and a average time to check out of between 0.2 and 0.6 minutes. So that would be what, 4/10 of a minute to check out. The checkout looked pretty quick. They looked for your sticker and then you were free to go. Observation area, while the nominal time is 15 minutes for non-high-risk patients and 30 minutes for high-risk patients, we know that's not going to be exact, so we have some randomness on that. So we said that the regular patients or the non-high risk range from 14 to 16 and the high risk range from 28 to 32. So those are obviously adjustable and would be beneficial, would helpful to the model performance if we had a better estimate of what those are. And then finally for the inoculation station, we said it was between 3 minutes and 5 minutes. So the expected time would be 4 minutes for patients. And then we have that additional time for Q&A time. And so I implemented that directly in the inoculation module. So bear with me here that the specific details of the model don't really matter, but the time that we want is this uniform time, uniformly distributed between 1 and 3 minutes. And so what that would mean to the model is that when a high-risk patient arrives at the inoculation station, they would spend between 3 and 5 minutes as a non-high-risk patient would, but then there would be an additional 1 to 3 minutes for that high-risk Q&A session. And so those times, again, were more or less estimated based on some preliminary discussion. So that is the current version of the model. So again, let me run it in a little bit faster mode here, and you can see what's going on. I will just change this into the animation sequence, and so you can see the different views of the model as it runs at with a speed factor of 25. And so you can see what that means if you look at the time of day. So 0 is opening time, and so we're just using raw hours, starting with, I guess 7:15 is when the first appointments are. And then you can see as the dosage is available builds over time, and then the patient information that we saw earlier. In the observation area, you can see that we maintain this number of right around, let me see if I can, let me get out of the sequence and say we have 30, 31, 32 you see here. And then when we go back here and look at the observation area, which is this red line, oops, I didn't mean to move that. Let me back that up, zoom out and zoom right here. Sorry about that. You can see here's that average area right here, that average number here over time. So you can see here we are around 11 a.m. and now you're seeing that the average number in the observation area hovers right around 33 or 34. You know, it oscillates a little bit with this arrival pattern, but it really hovers right around this value. And so we still have quite a bit of capacity left with our 92 available positions in the current configuration. So before we end, let's spend just a second talking about some of the analysis that we can do with the model. But again, let me caution you that a lot of the parameters that we're using, a lot of these times are estimates, and so we can't pay a lot of weight to the specific numbers that we get in the analysis. So let me show you what we have here. Let me reset this and we'll start that over, and you can see what's happening is I've defined two different scenarios, and a scenario is defined based on what are called controls, and the controls are the probability that a patient is high risk or the proportion of that population that's high risk, the no-show probability, the replenishment quantity, the replenishment inter-arrival time. So this is the time between, or the time that it takes the pharmacy to create one of the batches, in this case of size 12, and then the patient target. And the patient target is used to stop producing doses. And so the reason this is 1,050 when we know that our target for the day is currently 1,000 is to accommodate this no-show probability. And so let me run it, and you can see what's happening is we're running, for each one of our scenarios, we're going to run 10 replications so that we're properly replicating the model to account for randomness. You can see it runs pretty quickly. And the things that I have tracked here as responses are the total number of patients. So you can see that our scenario where we had no probability of no-show, we have right at 1,050, so we had right at our target. We also had patients that were remaining in the system. 2.2 and is just an average value, so our dosages, our target dosages were 1050, and so what that means is that we had, in a couple of cases, we had more than 1050. We also have something called closing time, and so we stopped taking patient appointments, but we have to keep the clinic open until the last patient leaves. And so we have targeted 8 hours of arrivals, so 8 hours, 4 blocks per hour, and then once that last batch of arrivals happens at time 8 in the model, this extra 33 minutes accounts for, or 0.33 hours, I should say, accounts for the clearing out the system. I keep track of the maximum number of patients in the observation area. So this is in the regular observation area. And so we have right at 40 is the maximum for scenario 1, and 38 is the maximum for scenario 2. So we never really got a high number of people in the observation area. I'm going to skip the average doses and end doses for now, because those aren't really meaningful the way we've done the estimation. One of the things that we do track is the average queue time for patients. So this is not the total time that patients are in the clinic. This is just the time that they're waiting in line. So when they walk in the door, they might wait in line to check in. Once they're checked in, they might wait in line for an inoculation station. And so what we're tracking is the average or the total queue time for each individual patient. And so for our second scenario, which I'm guessing is our most likely scenario with the no-show and the high-risk probability, you can see that about a little over a third of an hour is spent, waiting between the two waiting areas. We also have a lot more detailed results that if we look in what's called the pivot grid. And so, for example, if I'm interested in how long the patients spend in the system, so we have the total time in system. And so this says that the average time in system for patients is about 4/10 of an hour. And that total time includes the queue time and the service time. And so you can see that value is about 4/10 of an hour. We can also look at the queue length. So if I'm interested in, say, let me filter this just a little bit. So if I'm interested in the queue length, I'm going to go to my input buffers here. So I close all that down and go to input buffer and filter. And you can see our check-in input buffer. On average, we had almost one person in line on average, and at maximum we had 18.5. So keep in mind that on every 15-minute interval, we have a batch of patients arriving. So that 15 point or 18.5, we're probably going to see spike on those arrivals. But on average, over time, we didn't have a very long queue there. Similarly, to wait for, I guess I need to look at output buffers here. So let me add that to my list here. So click here and go to output buffer for my inoculation distribute. The number of people waiting who have gone through check-in and are now waiting for an open space in one of our 5 inoculation stations, on average was 3.7 with a maximum of 19.1. So occasionally you can see that this number did get pretty high. So you had, occasionally, or at the maximum anyway, 19 people waiting for an inoculation station. And so you can see here there are a lot of other numerical performance metrics available. And I don't really, as I mentioned before, I don't really want to dwell on these since we don't necessarily have accurate data. We can't really take any meaning or can't, we can't make assumptions about the correctness of these specific numbers. But once we get better estimates of those individual operation times, like the check-in time and the inoculation time and the pharmacy service rate, the variability around observation time, we'll get much better estimates of all of these performance metrics. So that is the current model, and I will update this as we get new data or as the configuration of the system changes.